I never thought of you as. I thought you were the announcer. I didn't even know you were the owner of the WWF. I just thought you were the announcer
You weren't
guy.
always the owner, were you?
Have you heard what happened to Vince McMahon? Because what's unfolding behind the scenes is just truly heartbreaking. The man who once ruled the wrestling world with an iron grip has vanished from the spotlight, and the silence is raising serious questions. Reports are emerging, whispers growing louder, and even his wife Linda has spoken out with a tone that shocked everyone. No one saw this coming. This isn't a storyline. This isn't part of the show. Something has changed, and it's not good. What really happened to Vince McMahon? Stay with us because what you're about to hear might leave you speechless. The rise of a titan. Long before he became one of the most polarizing figures in entertainment, Vince McMahon was just a kid with a dream and a chaotic childhood. He didn't grow up in luxury. In fact, he didn't even meet his biological father until he was 12. But when he did, everything changed. Vince Sr. ran Capital Wrestling Corporation, a small Northeast-based wrestling promotion. It was modest, old school, and tied to the traditions of the National Wrestling Alliance. Vince Jr. saw something different. He didn't want to maintain the system. He wanted to break it. What followed was nothing short of a hostile takeover of both the business and the entire industry. In the early 1980s, Vince McMahon purchased the company from his father and took a massive gamble. He would go national. This was unheard of at the time. Promoters stayed in their regions, respected their boundaries. Vince tore up the map. He poached talent from other territories, invested in cable television, and most importantly, put everything he had into building WrestleMania. That first WrestleMania in 1985 nearly broke him. He poured all of his finances into it. If it failed, there would be no safety net. But it didn't fail. It exploded. Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, Cyndi Lauper, and Muhammad Ali brought mainstream attention to wrestling like never before. The rest was history. From that point on, Vince McMahon became larger than life. He wasn't just the CEO behind the curtain. He stepped into the ring himself, played the villain, got physical, and turned himself into a character the audience loved to hate. He was arrogant, over the top, and ruthless, a perfect reflection of his real-world reputation. When Stone Cold Steve Austin flipped him off and delivered a stunner, it became the visual that defined the Attitude Era. But Vince was always in control, even when it looked like chaos. Year after year, he pushed the boundaries. The 1990s were wild. Ratings wars, blood feuds, insane stunts. Vince kept the machine moving, transforming WWF into a billion-dollar empire. And when he bought out WCW in 2001, it was the final confirmation. He had won. He had become the undisputed king of professional wrestling. What many people don't realize is how much of the company ran through him personally. He wasn't a distant executive. Vince was in the trenches, rewriting scripts, managing creative decisions, calling the shots on talent, and sometimes sleeping only a few hours a night. He traveled constantly, worked out at absurd hours, and rarely took vacations. Those who knew him described him as a machine. There was no off switch. Even as the WWE became a publicly traded company, even as new stars like John Cena, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins emerged, Vince kept his grip tight. He shaped not only the business side of wrestling, but its cultural tone. The way matches were paced, how interviews were delivered, how rivalries were structured. All of it had Vince's fingerprints. His presence was unmistakable. And for decades, it seemed like nothing could slow him down. But there were hints. Every once in a while, someone would point out how Vince never showed signs of slowing. But maybe he should have. Injuries, surgeries, controversies, scandals. He plowed through them all. The world changed around him, and yet Vince stayed the same. For better or worse, he refused to let go. What's even more remarkable is that despite decades of power, he remained a mystery. Fans saw the character. Employees saw the boss. Few ever saw the man. And now, with recent reports raising serious concerns about his condition, people are looking back and wondering, did we ever really know the full story behind the rise of this titan? Or were we just watching the show he wanted us to see? Behind the curtain. To the world, Vince McMahon was indestructible. But behind the curtain, his life was a maze of rituals, paranoia, and extremes. Former employees and insiders have described his daily routine as downright punishing. Wake up before dawn, train like a bodybuilder, fly across the country, micromanage live shows, rewrite scripts until the early morning hours, then do it all again. He didn't just run WWE, he was WWE. Every line of commentary, every match outcome, every on-air joke or insult, Vince had a hand in it. That control wasn't symbolic. It was absolute. Stories about his intensity became legend. He hated sneezing, especially his own, because it reminded him he wasn't in control. He refused to acknowledge tiredness and expected others to do the same. If a writer fell asleep during a red-eye flight, they'd often wake up to find Vince sitting wide-eyed across from them, still working. He was known to eat absurd amounts of steak, detested certain foods like chicken salad, and refused to believe in sickness. The joke among staff was simple. Vince thought he could outwork death. But as time went on, the cracks started to show. Behind the powerful walk and tailored suits, there were rumors. Quiet whispers about surgeries. Talk of mounting injuries from decades of physical stunts. His on-screen character may have been cartoonish, but the man behind it all had been body slammed, hit with chairs, and even taken real punches in his quest to lead by example. That came with a cost. Still, Vince never allowed weakness to be part of the story. When he tore both quadriceps in 2005 after running into the ring at the Royal Rumble, he famously sat in the ring barking orders, unable to stand, but refusing to show pain. It was the perfect metaphor. Even if something broke, he would pretend it didn't. And most fans never knew. But not everyone inside the company was blind to the toll. Writers and producers who had been there for years noticed how he began to lean more on others. He would disappear from some meetings. He'd sometimes pause and seem forgetful mid-conversation. These weren't catastrophic moments, just small stutters from a man who had never allowed even one. Some chalked it up to age, others weren't so sure. By the 2010s, Vince was well into his 70s, but still kept the same pace he had in the 80s. The wrestling world evolved, social media changed how fans interacted, and his audience grew younger. But Vince's instincts remained rooted in the past. While some admired his consistency, others began to see him as out of step. More talent began speaking up. Triple H, Stephanie, and others within the family started handling creative decisions. Slowly, the empire began to decentralize, at least on the surface. Yet, for all the chatter about a changing of the guard, Vince's shadow loomed over everything. Even when he stepped down in 2022 amid investigations, few believed it was permanent. And they were right. He came back within months. Just like that, the man who built it all reinserted himself into the machine. No apology tour, no farewell speech. He returned with a trimmed mustache and quiet defiance, as if to say, "I'm still here." But something was different. Even through heavily controlled public appearances, people noticed. He moved slower. His face looked sunken. His posture had changed. And for a man who once prided himself on power and presence, these were signs that couldn't be completely hidden. Fans began to ask questions. What toll had decades of relentless ambition taken? What was going on behind the curtain now? The truth was still out of sight, but for the first time in a long time, the illusion of Vince McMahon's invincibility began to slip. And what lay underneath wasn't a character. It was a man, older, worn, and maybe for the first time, vulnerable. The sudden step back. For someone who had dominated the spotlight for over 4 decades, Vince McMahon's silence became louder than any promo he ever cut. He wasn't just stepping back, he was disappearing, bit by bit. It didn't happen overnight, but over the past couple of years, something changed. The man who once stood front and center during every controversy, every milestone, every spectacle, was no longer taking a bow. And those paying attention began to wonder why. The most obvious shift came in 2022. That year, news broke of alleged hush money payments connected to misconduct claims. Headlines exploded. Vince, at age 77, announced he was stepping down. The statement was clinical, brief, and businesslike. Many assumed it was the end of an era, but just months later, he was back, elected to the board, influencing corporate strategy, even re-emerging as a figure behind the scenes. His return felt like classic Vince, unapologetic, strategic, controversial. Fans were divided, but most agreed it was the kind of power play only he could pull off. Still, something felt different this time. He wasn't showing up at live shows. He wasn't backstage barking orders. And when he did appear, rarely, it wasn't the Vince people remembered. He looked diminished. Gone was the swagger, the commanding presence. In its place was a thinner, older man, trying to maintain control of an empire that had long since outgrown any one person. The shift wasn't just physical, it was tonal. Even when he spoke publicly, there was hesitation, pauses, a lack of fire that once defined him. Then came the reports, quiet at first, whispers from those close to the company, that he had undergone major spinal surgery, that the recovery had taken longer than expected, that there had also been a hip replacement. These weren't just minor procedures. These were life-altering surgeries, especially for someone pushing 80. One report suggested the spinal operation had lasted several hours and left him temporarily unable to walk without assistance. None of this was confirmed directly by Vince or WWE. As always, the silence said more than a statement ever could. And then there were the rare public sightings. At the 2025 Super Bowl, cameras caught a glimpse of him leaving a luxury suite. But viewers noticed immediately. His frame looked gaunt. His walk was stiff. He was using a cane. The video went viral for all the wrong reasons. Fans who had grown up watching him as the over-the-top Mr. McMahon couldn't believe what they were seeing. It didn't feel like aging. It felt like a sudden collapse. Insiders tried to downplay it. He's recovering, some said. He's still sharp, claimed others. But the contrast was too stark to ignore. This wasn't the Vince McMahon of the Attitude Era, barking orders in the ring. This wasn't the businessman locking down billion-dollar TV deals. This was a man clearly battling something far bigger than the public had been told. Even those closest to him began managing expectations. Reports suggested he was no longer overseeing the daily operations of WWE's creative direction. Triple H had taken over fully. Other executives were handling contracts, marketing, and production. Vince's iron grip was loosening, not because he wanted it to, but because he had to. Still, the official messaging remained vague. No statement, no interview, no explanation. Just a lingering silence and occasional sightings that left fans with more questions than answers. Was he okay? Was he stepping away for good this time? Or was this just another quiet chapter in a story that never really ends? What was once unthinkable was now hard to deny. Vince McMahon, the man who once called himself genetically superior, looked fragile. And for the first time, it wasn't part of a storyline. No one saw this coming. According to reports that surfaced just days ago, Vince McMahon was once again in the hospital. This time, the concern wasn't about legal trouble, television ratings, or backstage drama. This was different. Sources close to the situation described him as unrecognizable, frail, quiet, and far removed from the larger-than-life figure that once strutted into arenas to the roar of thousands. There was no grand entrance, no defiant smirk, no Mr. McMahon character, just a man in recovery, surrounded by silence. What makes this so difficult to process is how sudden it feels, even after all the warning signs. For years, Vince managed to project an illusion of invincibility. He had defied age, injury, and scandal. He was the guy who tore both quads on live television and kept giving instructions from the mat like nothing happened. The guy who once worked 20-hour days and bragged about sleeping only a few hours a night. So when the news broke that he was back in a hospital bed, struggling to move, looking weak and disoriented, people didn't just feel shocked. They felt something else. Heartbreak. And that's the part no one saw coming. Because no matter what you think of Vince McMahon, whether you admired him, resented him, or just couldn't look away, you can't deny the impact he had. He built an empire from the ground up. He changed how people viewed wrestling forever. He launched the careers of household names like The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, John Cena, and countless others. He turned wrestling from a regional niche into a global phenomenon. His fingerprints are all over modern entertainment, whether people admit it or not. So when fans say, "Have you heard what happened to Vince McMahon?" it's just truly heartbreaking. They mean more than just his medical condition. They're mourning the collapse of a myth that told them some people really were untouchable, that grit and determination could hold off the years, that someone like Vince would never fade away quietly. And yet, here we are. Those close to him haven't shared much. No public video, no statement, no denial. The few who have seen him reportedly say he's barely recognizable from the man they worked with just a couple of years ago. The same man who once barked out orders from the gorilla position now needs help standing up. One former employee said, "It's like seeing a statue crack." It's unclear how long he was hospitalized or what his current condition is. Everything is being kept quiet. But the fact that the news got out at all is telling. Vince has always been meticulous about controlling narratives. If this slipped, it likely means it couldn't be hidden any longer. Wrestling fans are no strangers to shocking turns. But this one stings. Maybe because it's not a scripted moment. There's no comeback promo, no steel chair save, no retirement speech in the center of the ring. Just the image of a man who gave everything to the business, now looking like he might not have anything left to give. And yet somehow the story feels unfinished. No one knows if this is the final chapter or just a pause. Vince McMahon has surprised the world before. He's made headlines when no one expected it. But this time, the silence is the headline. And for a man who once defined spectacle, it's the quiet that's most unnerving. So yes, have you heard what happened to Vince McMahon? Because it's just truly heartbreaking. A world left speechless. The reaction was immediate, and it didn't just come from fans. This time, it hit home. While the public pieced together the clues from rumors and rare sightings, someone much closer to Vince McMahon broke the silence: his wife, Linda. For decades, she had stood beside him through empire building, scandals, lawsuits, and the highest highs of fame. But what she said now was different, and it caught everyone off guard. "Something is deeply wrong," Linda reportedly confided to a close friend, according to online sources. "He's not the man he used to be. Not physically, not emotionally." Those words, raw and stripped of any corporate polish, began circulating fast. She didn't speak through WWE channels or press releases. It came quietly, indirectly, but it landed with force. The woman who had helped co-found the company, who had kept a composed front for decades, now sounded devastated. And in that moment, it all felt real. The wrestling world suddenly seemed a lot smaller. Wrestlers, past and present, began speaking out. Some offered carefully worded respect. Others dropped the filters and shared their shock. One longtime WWE producer wrote, "I never thought I'd see the day. Vince always seemed invincible. But if Linda's that worried, maybe we all should be." Fans reacted the same way. Message boards were flooded with old clips and tributes. TikToks and Instagram reels showing Vince at his wildest, spraying beer, jumping into the ring, growling into a mic, now carried a tone of quiet sadness. And then there was the contrast. WWE, the machine Vince built, kept running like clockwork. There were no tributes, no get-well-soon graphics, no pauses. The weekly shows aired, the scripts moved forward, and the lights stayed on. To some, it was heartless. But to others, it was exactly what Vince would have wanted. No pity, no attention, just business. Still, it didn't stop the feeling that something big had shifted. People who had worked with Vince for years admitted they'd noticed signs. A slower walk, a quieter voice, a reluctance to stand for too long during meetings. But no one expected it to reach this point, especially not Linda. According to people close to her, she had tried to push him toward retirement years ago. She worried about his health, about his inability to slow down. But Vince, as always, refused. Now, watching him from a distance, unable to stop the decline, she was reportedly heartbroken. And that's what gave this whole situation a different kind of weight. Not just the physical deterioration, not just the business implications, but the emotional unraveling of a partnership that had weathered everything. Linda had always played the composed, behind-the-scenes role. She'd been CEO, a Senate candidate, a calming force while Vince stormed through life like a hurricane. But now she was sounding the alarm. And the world finally listened. Of course, questions followed. Was she speaking out because no one else would? Was this her way of making sure people knew the truth before it got buried behind corporate silence? WWE remained quiet. No statement, no confirmation, no denial, just the usual programming. But the absence of a response made Linda's words ring louder. This wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about what happens when even the strongest begin to fade, and the people closest to them have to watch it happen powerlessly. So now the world waits to see if Vince will return, waits to see if WWE will finally say something, and waits to see what Linda, the woman who had remained silent through everything, might say next. Because this time her voice didn't sound like part of the show. It sounded like grief. The final bell? In the world Vince McMahon built, the show always went on. No matter the injuries, no matter the scandals, no matter who left or who died, the lights stayed on and the cameras kept rolling. That was his rule. That was his religion. But now, as questions mount and silence fills the space where his voice used to be, fans are left wondering, what happens when the showrunner vanishes? There's no official word. No medical statement. No final promo. Just the image that continues to haunt everyone. Vince McMahon, reportedly hospitalized, frail, thin, and barely recognizable. And next to that image, Linda's whispered words, quietly revealing what few dared say out loud. That the man who once ruled every second of WWE might no longer be in control of anything at all. If this is the end, it's not the one anyone expected. Vince was supposed to go out on his terms, maybe one last public appearance, a symbolic farewell, a passing of the torch in the ring. Instead, we're left with shadows, with rumors, with heartbreak. The empire he built continues to thrive, but the emperor has gone silent. And yet, there's a strange beauty in that silence. Because for all the noise Vince McMahon created over his lifetime, the roaring crowds, the pyrotechnics, the music, the chaos, this moment feels deeply human. It cuts through the bravado, the ego, the gimmicks. What's left is just a man. One who gave everything he had to build a world millions fell in love with. And now, that world keeps spinning without him. There are those who believe he'll resurface, that Vince McMahon doesn't know how to stay gone, that he'll walk back into an office, bark orders, maybe even show up on a screen. But there's also a growing sense that we may have already seen the final chapter. And if that's true, it happened without warning. No theme music, no dramatic twist, just a quiet vanishing act that no one saw coming. So where does that leave us? With memories, with contradictions, with awe, frustration, admiration, and sadness. Because Vince McMahon wasn't just a man, he was a myth. And now that myth is breaking apart, revealing the cost of being larger than life for too long. We may never know the full truth of what's happening behind those walls. But we know this much. The silence means something. It speaks louder than any promo ever could. And for the first time in decades, the question isn't what Vince will do next. The question is, what will we remember? What do you think? Let us know in the comments.